Welcome to the 1110 Leadership Podcast, where we tackle issues at the intersection of leadership, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Rob Shields, Vice President of Strategy at 1110 Leadership, and I'm joined by my co-host, founder and CEO of 1110 Leadership, David Spickard. Proverbs 1110 lays out a bold and countercultural vision. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. We're here to ask, what does it look like practically to be this type of leader? Leaders willing to invest everything they have so that everyone around them can thrive. Join us on the journey as we lean in, listen, and learn how to become Proverbs 11:10 kind of leaders. The kind of leaders that make our cities rejoice. David.
Hey there, Rob.
Hey there. How are we doing today?
I'm good. How are you? Added a word to my response.
You did. That's look at that growth. We're recording this on a Friday, so I want to say happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday to you. Excited about the weekend.
Yes. I know you're an avid sports fan, so this is kind of like we had the Masters behind us. We've got playoffs galore, NBA, NHL, right? This is kind of a golden hour, if you will.
It is a golden season, next 6 weeks or so. Love it.
Isn't it true that a fun fact about you is that you read the newspaper word for word, like beginning to end? Does that make that up about you?
Not the newspaper, the sports page.
The sports page. That's it.
Since I was 6 years old, I can remember this. I read the sports page every morning. I've done that since I was 6.
That's incredible.
I'm not reading through the whole thing. I'm looking at the headlines and anything that interests me. Over breakfast, I now have a digital copy of the morning paper. So that's a routine of mine. I'm realizing as I get older how routine I am.
You like things the way you like it. I feel like all of us, to a certain extent, have that quality about us.
Things I think are normal are not normal to everybody else.
I think there's a lot people out there have a lot weirder habits than reading the sports page. You know, that's I'm sure that's not an embarrassing fun fact at all.
Well, that's encouraging.
That's great. I love it. Yeah, I've got my son is in the midst of filling out an NBA bracket, which is kind of confusing to do now that they have this play-in tournament. I didn't even realize it was like there's some double elimination. Some are, some aren't. It's not as clean as March Madness. That's my only critique. But they're not asking for my feedback.
There are very few 8-year-olds filling out a bracket for the NBA playoffs.
That feels like something you would have in common. 6-year-old you and my son would have been friends for sure.
For sure.
And had probably some epic battles duking it out in the backyard basketball goal. That's great. Well, I'm looking forward to today's episode. We're now at episode 43.
Wow.
Of the podcast. That's crazy.
Yeah. Time flies.
Technically, 40th is one that feels like you separate the ones that are monumental, and that was a replay episode. So it feels like we're playing catch up a little bit to just how much content that we've put out on this journey. It's been exciting.
It has been.
That really helps tee up today's conversation because there's a lot of topics that we've a lot of threads we've pulled on here on the 1110 Leadership Podcast, but one that we really want to be intentional to consistently go back to is this drilling down on the concept of rest and its relationship to just leadership. So I know that we have mentioned it and had previous episodes dedicated, earliest in the very first series on Thrive, when we're talking about health, we talk about rest and how important it is for the life of a leader. And then we also talked about creating a rest plan and how important it is to be intentional in planning our rest. Instead of resting from our work, making this transition to working out of rest. So for listeners who are looking for that context, would encourage you to go back, and we speak more specifically to that in previous episodes, but really kind of tease up for us to drill down a little bit more on where you go in your book. The last time we talked about rest, we kind of gave a flyover to the story that you unpack in chapter 4 of The Just Leader. So what I would love to be able to do is be able to camp out on this story of the wee little man, right? Story of Zacchaeus, that oftentimes, I don't know if you grew up in church, I'm not sure how much rest comes to mind as other things. That would have been interesting if we were to poll our listeners. What was the main takeaway from the story of Zacchaeus when you heard about it in Sunday school on the felt board? I'm not sure if they would have put two and two together here of Zacchaeus as an example of rest. But before we get into that connection, would you just maybe unpack how you present that story in your book, why it's there, and the intentionality of especially how early you present it over the course of the many chapters you dedicate to just leadership?
Yeah, it's fun to think about Zacchaeus because I think about my kids when they were little. One of my sons, he just loves Zacchaeus. He loves the story of Zacchaeus. And we tend to think about that story from a child's perspective of the wee little man.
Mm,
But when you unpack Zacchaeus, it's really important to understand who he actually was. He was a traitor. He was probably one of the most unjust people as a Jew who was hired by the Roman government to basically extort his fellow people, the Jews, as he was the chief tax collector. He wasn't just a tax collector, he was the chief tax collector, and he would extort money out of his own people. And so to think about someone in our society that people just hate or who is visibly unjust
mm,
in the way they operate and the way that they build their wealth, and Zacchaeus was extremely wealthy too, because
mm,
he built his wealth off the backs of this unjust practice. So this wee little man that we like to sing about is actually someone. Think about who would you categorize in our world today who's the most unjust,
mm.
awful person
Just
or people
bad,
group?
bad guy. Like one of the articles we'll reference here later and drop in the show notes unpacks the story of Zacchaeus. It talks about how if you have an image of him, you might think of Wee Little Man in the movies of like Joe
Right.
Pesci's character in Home Alone. Love those movies, but it was more like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. Like that's the Wee Little Man we're talking about is the gangster, not the buffoon that you were laughing. Oh, that's funny. He just keeps going after Kevin. That's not who we're talking about here.
It's amazing when you think about this story, and we all know about it, many of us do, where he couldn't see this man Jesus who was coming in because of the crowds, and everybody had heard about this man who was healing and was talking about a different kind of kingdom. And because he was short, he was a wee little man, he could not see. So despite the shame that he would experience by going up into a tree, he had to see this man. And you can imagine the crowds looking at Zacchaeus going, what in the world is he doing? And again, these are crowds that hated him, but Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus. And this crazy thing that Jesus does by calling out his name when he sees him up in the tree, he knew Zacchaeus and he called him down because he wanted to go to his house and be with him. And Zacchaeus immediately came down to respond to Jesus's invitation or his request to go and be with him and his family in his home, which is an invitation of fellowship and an invitation into relationship that was extraordinary for Jesus to demonstrate. And we see Jesus loving an unjust man. Like
Mm,
there was, and demonstrating that there's none of us, no matter what we've done, is too far away from the reach of God's grace and
mm,
invitation for relationship, which is something that we cannot overlook in this story about the way that he invited Zacchaeus and ultimately his family into deep relationship. And then what was amazing was how Zacchaeus responded. And we see that as Jesus offered relationship with him, Zacchaeus said, Lord, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. And this gives us a window into how we get to rest. Because the thing that gave Zacchaeus power and identity, which ultimately is his money, he's now letting go of in a way that's radical because he's doing it far beyond what is required for him. According to the Jewish law, he would have been required to give 10% back to the poor, but instead he says, I'm giving half. So he's giving 50%. And the law also said if he defrauded anyone out of anything, he needed to give it back 100% plus 20% interest. but he's now saying, I'll give 4 times the amount. So he's given 400 times what is required. So this is a radical response to Jesus's invitation, and it's Zacchaeus showing that he understands who Jesus is, and therefore he can let go of the things that he felt were giving him safety and security and ultimately rest in order for him to make the wrong things right that he has done in his life.
Yeah, I love the layered aspect of this story because before we get to the doing, right? Which is, we talk about just leadership. There's a lot that needs to be done in leadership that's very active, very proactive. You're talking about the importance of what we need to receive.
Yeah, we call this quality zero.
Yes, in our group,
Yeah,
that's a fun. That's a
yeah,
fun way to talk about it.
yeah.
The 4 qualities of a just leader is a little misleading. There's a 5th quality that is at the foundation,
It's the
and this is
foundation.
it.
Yeah, it's the foundation quality, understanding our position and the acceptance of God's grace in our life, the freedom that comes from this, the fact that we don't have to be defensive when we look at ourselves and the things that we may have done that have made things broken, and that we can look inside of ourselves to see what we can do to make right things that have been wrong, even things we may not have even understood that we've done.
Mm.
So that's why we even start with seeing the whole playing field. We start with ourselves. But because of this, we're not defensive in doing that. We're not bowing up as people share with us our blind spots or the biases we might have. We can do that with freedom. And then that leads us to looking at society as a whole and asking hard questions about what's going on in the broader world around us that's unjust, because we can do it from a place of freedom and acceptance and knowing that God has covered us because of what Jesus has done for us.
Yeah, I think I want to go there on the way the story ends. Well, even before that, I'd love for you to speak even briefly. I know we've had previous rest episodes of like make a rest plan. Sabbath is important, but I don't want to skip that in this conversation too, because it feels like a very real disconnection happened with Zacchaeus in a way that he knew his identity was no longer in tied to performance, right? And I think that allowed him to have a posture of rest. Now, obviously, this story all happened seemingly very quickly, right? Where he's at least we don't know how long it took for him to part with his assets, right, and make restitution. That could have happened over a long period of time, but the commitment was instant, which is really fascinating. As we think about how this lands and how this spirit of the Zacchaeus story applies to business leaders today, can you just talk about how more the spirit of being at rest, what does that spirit look like for a business leader who's wrestling with like, how do I actually live? How do I work to receive that truth and like live in that truth and stay in that headspace in the frenetic, fast paced, workaholic, you know, soul crushing atmospheres that some of our listeners are existing in and expected to lead in? I think we got to acknowledge that elephant in the room before we move to like even seeing others is really like how a leader exists and how they really stay in that headspace when everything about maybe their daily, weekly rhythms it was really antagonistic towards keeping that truth front and center.
We have to have people around you who remind you of your identity and that you're good and that you're okay
Mm,
and that our worst case scenario is a life of eternal bliss in a world that will work and be glorious, and that the things that we are given to today we can hold loosely with open hands. They don't define us. We have a broad view of success, and that success is not necessarily tied to ultimate performance measures that the world may suggest, although those things are important. Certainly, we need to perform well, have profit for our businesses. They need to do well. But even if they fail, we're going to be good. We're okay. God promises his
mm,
provision. And so this is really hard to be mindful of. We have to have regular rhythms of being in worship. We have to have regular rhythms of being in community and not being
mm.
isolated. We have to have regular rhythms of being restful, which is why we do a rest plan. We have to sleep well. We need to exercise. We need to carve out times for our family. We need to build in margin. I find a lot of companies that we work with, leaders feel like they're in an environment where the tail is wagging the dog, where the circumstances of their industry or their work is just controlling almost everything about them. And so we help them think through, okay, how can you take back control
Mm.
of your schedule? When do you say no? How do you delegate more and trust your people more instead of all of it ending up on your shoulders and you're carrying the load? It's pretty comprehensive. We
Mm.
could talk about this for a long time, but it's critical. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why we call it quality zero. You can't
Mm.
be in a place to even think about what to do around these issues, because what we're getting ready to talk about is next level stuff about what
Yeah.
just leaders then think about and what they're engaged in. If our outcome is for cities rejoicing, that we have
Yeah.
to be able to have capacity for, and that comes from a heartbeat and a posture of rest.
Yes. Yes. I'm so glad you used the P word, and that's it's huge. That's why it's zero, because it's a posture, a rest posture of my identity is not what I do. It's not what I have done, right? And for Zacchaeus, it was a lot of bad stuff. But even if you're not that person, we need to follow the path of Zacchaeus in detaching our identity from our work, because I think that same burden stays with us. We do carry that. We do have that in common with Zacchaeus, as we feel the weight and the pressure or the fear of mistakes, right? Or the shame. There's a lot of things that I think we can connect to Zacchaeus' story, and that Jesus offers us freedom the same way he's offering Zacchaeus freedom. And we've got to really live into receiving that. The same is true of Zacchaeus, is true of us in that story, right? That
Mhm.
no matter what we've done, no matter who we've wronged, no matter what brokenness we've been a part of, that's not who we are anymore. That's not our story. That's not our identity. And I love that you're mentioning that's rhythmic. That's not a preach it once to yourself. That's a preach it every day, and have rhythms and people and community in your life that are helping you remember when you are so likely to forget, because the systems or the work in which you are occupied in, it's so easy in the way we're expected to work to forget.
Yeah, it's going against the tide. It's
Yeah.
going upstream.
Yeah.
And so we always have to come back to this in our groups because it's so countercultural and you have to be incredibly intentional.
Mm. Okay, so that's the disclaimer for this next question. Is we're approaching this from a posture of rest and acceptance. I want to take it to the end of the story. And this is where, David, why I love the work we do. I love I love just leadership. I love the ability that we get to come alongside leaders in their even specific company context, of the both and of thriving and justice. This is the next level here of, even most pastors may only preach one of these sermons of rest matters, justice matters. Who integrates those, right? But I'm thankful that we do here at the 1110 Leadership Podcast. So Zacchaeus made wrong things right. He restored brokenness from a place of rest. And I think the both and of that is really powerful. So what I want to ask you is, what does this look like today? What should, when we think about how Zacchaeus responded to grace, how does that translate to us 2000 plus years later as sinners who also have been saved by grace? What does that look like for us to enter into that side of this equation of living out a just response after having received um, this gift of grace?
Yeah, so when you have that kind of experience that Zacchaeus had, and those of us who follow Jesus, we've had that experience in whatever way. It may not have been as dramatic as Zacchaeus and being called out from a tree, but we've received the same grace. We've received the same forgiveness. We are justified. And when we experience that deeply for ourselves individually, the natural response is, okay, where's that happening in our world? And how do we see this brokenness and things that are unjust in our world? And how do we begin to think about the ways in which we can be involved with making things right in our world? How is injustice being perpetuated for those who are vulnerable and marginalized in our communities? How do we look at systems that are in our communities that make that injustice happen, whether it's through family systems or work systems or government systems? How do I begin to look even at my industry and my work industry and look at the things that are broken, and what are the ways that my business can be a blessing within the industry? How can I be a voice within our industry about things that are broken? Are there ways in which our business is affected by injustice that we need to pay attention to? We begin to look at our city and start to see, again, when we talk about seeing the whole playing field, we're going to talk a lot about seeing our city and our places where we work and understanding what's going on in our cities. I loved what we heard from Ross Chapman from Denver Institute for Faith and Work on our podcast a few episodes ago, where he talked about Nehemiah getting a report of the city. And
Love it.
he wept over that report initially. He lamented what was going on in his city. And all of our cities have things to lament. And if we're not in touch with those things, then we need to get in touch with those things. If we think we can just live in a bubble and not understand the places where people who are vulnerable are experiencing real hopelessness because of what they face every day, and that doesn't prick our heart, then we need to ask some hard questions of ourselves. How do we think about all of that? So it's really about how we become a restorative presence in our cities, in our companies, in our industries. And like I said, who has time for that? right? Like, what are you talking
There goes my rest.
Like, what are you talking about, David? Like, I'm just trying to survive.
Yeah, just trying to keep our company above water.
Like, I'm just trying to lead my people. We're just trying to make sales. Right? So this is, again, where it requires next level of leadership. Why we love the Just Leadership groups is because you need a group of people who are peers, who are both talking about these things and lifting other people up, so that we can think about this next level of leadership. Because that's why we're here. We're here to be agents of justice, agents of mishpat and tzedakah, justice and righteousness in our world, to create a taste of heaven on earth as it is in heaven. So we leave with more questions and answers from our groups, and that's a good thing.
Yes.
It's about wrestling with this stuff more than having the pat answers, because the goal is just to be in the game.
Yep.
Because when you're in the game, things happen because God makes those things happen. And we're inviting all of you listening to be in the game, whatever that looks like, and continue to be a part of these conversations. And where we can help, we're happy to do that. We're not experts. We're just trying to push ourselves in the game. And both Rob and I, we have moments where we go, just to sit this one out. I won't speak for you, Rob, but I'll speak for myself.
No,
I'm going to go to the sidelines right now. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be confronted with these things. Or, are you really saying that my sacrifice is what leads me to fullness? I'd rather pursue comfort than sacrifice. Thank you very much. But no, this is where God has us to experience life. And he says, when you seek the welfare of your city, to which we're called as exiles, then in its welfare, we will experience our welfare. So our personal flourishing is tied to our city and our place flourishing. And that's really important.
It's like one of our group members said recently, the myth of that there's such thing as a hole in the other side of the boat. This idea that it doesn't affect me, that hole over there, that brokenness in my city, that's not my problem.
Mm-hmm.
Is the same thing as a hole in the other side of the boat not being your problem. There is no such thing as a hole in a boat that ain't your problem if you're in the boat. And I love that. I love because it's profound truth. But I don't think we really see things that way. I don't think we feel tied.
No.
And we went there with our last 2 episodes, right? Of a lot of this is because the waters we swim in culturally have a real sharp streak of individualism versus this idea that Keller unpacked in the article that we spent the last 2 episodes unpacking, right? Of the community is this essential, this non-negotiable quality of biblical justice, that others have a claim on my stuff, right? So I must give voluntarily, because I feel like that's where this story of Zacchaeus gets really controversial. Is like, what do you mean? So many times people of faith are arguing that had nothing to do with me. And that's where this idea of the posture of defensiveness just goes away. The question is not, what does that have to do with me? That's the wrong question. It's, how can I be an agent of repair and restoration? Whether I was complicit or not, how do I be salt in this situation and help slow down the decay in my industry, right? In my city, and this is where, David, I do think that this gets back to resting really well, not only being excellent at work, but excellent at rest and excellent at reminding ourselves of who we are in Christ, so that we can actually have a restful posture to ask these questions. But then I also avoid the trap of thinking that we've got to solve these things in the macro. Because like we talk about with our group members, when we kind of feel the weight of these things hitting them, it's really important for us to say, hey, can we just pause for a second and say, you're not meant to solve the world's problems. Much of how we wrestle with this is going to be within the context of how you already spend your time at work. How can I be a restorative presence in my own position? Don't fall into the lie of thinking this is only additive to what I already have going on, because that then, you're right. I mean, where do you have the space, the white space in your calendar if you're only adding this stuff? Versus, how do I look at how I'm already spending my time through a different lens of what do I need to see? So, David, now you have the tall task. You have the very tall task on this episode, maybe more than others, of taking us to the bottom line.
So we started with a wee little man, and now I have a tall task. So
you see what we did there? I like it. You ready? Give our listeners a bottom line.
Bottom line is, Jesus asked Zacchaeus to come down a tree to be in relationship with him. And he ended up going up a tree, the cross. Jesus did, so that we could be in relationship with him. It's a powerful metaphor. It's a powerful picture. And you just wonder how Scripture and so many things point to the cross all over Scripture. And this is one of them, where Zacchaeus happened to be in a tree. And Jesus was able to offer that kind of fellowship with him because he knew he was going to a cross to pay for all of Zacchaeus' sins and all of our sins for those of us who put our trust and faith in him. So our ultimate rest comes from that. It's quite incredible that God would offer that gift to us by his grace, not because of anything that we've done. And that as a result of that, we can be people who have purpose in life, and to know without a shadow of a doubt that our identity is secure and our future is secure. So there's only one way to do this, and it's not performative. And kind of doing all the things right to make things right. That's not how this goes. It goes from a deep understanding of our place and our position with Jesus and the relationship we have with him, what he's given to us that allow us to be men and women of justice, fully qualified, not because of what we do, but because of what he's done, and that he's offering fullness for us if we want to follow him down that path.
Well said. Well said. The journey of justice is a journey that is defined by rest, and we can both from it, and it also is where we are going to find ultimate rest is on the path that Jesus walked, right? Is how we then bear crosses on others' behalf because of the cross that he bore on our behalf. That's beautiful. Quality zero.
Quality zero.
Let's not forget it. We never graduate from it. We just go deeper into it.
That's right.
It's awesome, David. Well, almost want to say amen there. Felt like you just took us to church, which is pretty cool.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Yep. We'll see you next time. To learn more about 1110 Leadership, visit our website at 1110leadership.com. That's the numerals 11, then spelled out TEN leadership.com. That's 11 TEN leadership.com. There you'll find more resources to equip you on the journey of becoming an 1110 leader. You can also get connected to our growing leadership network. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend. To help others find us, you can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.